it was like a Paulian moment. It was like scales fell off my eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do this full time. This is what I need to do. This was summer of 2021.
Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of Up Next. Today, I get a chance to have a conversation with Scott Elequin, Executive Director of Switchboard, a tool, a platform that I'm just very, very excited. Scott, welcome, and I can't wait to hear more about it later on.
Good to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Hey, as we're talking, where's home for you, Scott?
I live in Austin, Texas, and most of our folks are here, although our team is actually around the world now.
Got it. And then, were you born and raised in Austin, or where was home originally for you?
As much as could be. Actually, I was born in Pennsylvania, lived in Kentucky. My father had come here from the Philippines. And then at some point we settled in Texas. And I think like a lot of things, people end up in Texas and they just never leave. And that was true for me since, I guess, fifth grade.
Ah, now, I know you just mentioned that your dad was from the Philippines. Is he Filipino?
Oh, yes. Yeah, he's Filipino. And actually, my cousin, who I had not seen since 1986, was in Austin this week. And I just had dinner with her and her husband actually a couple of days ago.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And so for you, so you're Filipino and then you're Caucasian. Your mom's Caucasian.
Yeah.
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 Very, very nice.
Yeah,
So
they
when
met.
you go ahead.
Well, they met in a hospital. He was doing his residency in the United States. They met in a hospital in Kentucky, and I happened shortly after that. And then we moved to Texas back when I was, still in elementary school.
Yeah. Have you been back to the Philippines? Do you go there regularly?
Well, only once, and I was in graduate school at the time, but I do actually have a trip planned there for next spring.
Very, very good. Okay. Very good. Scott, when you graduated from college, what did you think that you were going to do? What was your original route?
Wow. I think that when I was leaving college, I wanted to go build stuff. I was really into computer systems, more on the business side. And where I really spent the majority of my career was in consulting around Oracle. And when you think about Oracle as a technology platform, this was more about Oracle's business products. So finance and manufacturing and customer service and supply chain logistics. It's really informed my whole career was how do you make businesses work better? And frankly, I think I'm kind of a tinkerer. I like to be involved with seeing how things work and seeing how you could improve them by using tools.
Yeah. Scott, were you like this when you were a little kid? And the reason I asked this is after Washington University in St. Louis, I spent 10 years building cell towers.
Mhm.
I've always enjoyed tinkering ever since when I was younger with all my toys. I would love to build the bases with all of my action figures, all of that. That was always in my mentality, building stuff.
100%. So I don't know if you hung out at Radio Shack when you were growing up, but they
Mm-hmm.
used to have
Mm-hmm.
like a battery of the month club. So you could get one battery every month and get your card stamped. And then they
Yes.
had these 101 kits where you could, they're little springs and you put the wires on the board and you could turn it into a radio or you could turn it into like a flashing diode or you could turn it into all these different things by just rewiring the board. And it was a really cool way to see what was possible, honestly, with things that already existed.
Yeah. And for you, were you the type of person who sat there and followed rules, or did you just like forget the rules and the directions? Let me just figure it out.
Yeah, that's probably a topic I'm glad my wife's not here for you to hear you ask that question because I'm more about guidelines and rules. And actually, as part of my tinkering, my brother had gone into the Coast Guard when I was 14 years old, and he had a broken car, and he gave it to me, or I bought it from him, and actually started working on that car, and became much into welding and mechanics and building stuff that way. But back then there weren't really books on old Datsuns. You just had to go figure it out. So
Yeah.
much more about creating and improvisation probably than necessarily following like the recipe.
Yeah, yeah. It is literally like an IKEA bookshelf. I start taking all these pieces out and say, okay, step one, or even Legos. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I could do it. So I would just start building things by myself.
Yeah, and I say that I'm the same way. I don't necessarily recommend that, but I think I've learned that putting it together wrong and then fixing it really takes less time than putting it together the right way the first time. Has been my experience so far. Now, at some point, I'm sure that I won't be able to get something back apart. But
Yeah.
that's a big part of, honestly, if you look at the launch of Switchboard and what we did in terms of our consulting business, trying different things and rapid experimentation is a great way. If you want to innovate, there's not a rule book, right? There's not something to follow, or it's not an innovation. It's just something that's been proven. So I think
Yeah.
my mindset's really good for creating new things. And maybe I'm less effective at running things. I don't know, but I think that it being part of the solution is where the fun is to me.
Mm. So for you, a lot of times when do you feel like you have so many ideas in your head? And then with people who are working with you, how do they work with you when you have so many ideas in your head where you're sitting there trying? Because there are some people who just like rules, they like directions.
Um, whew, I would say that first thing, it's really good to build a team that kind of gets your eccentricities. And if you look even with both our business, which was Smart Doug Services, the Oracle customer's best friend, and Switchboard, I think that I have a lot of ideas and trying to channel those ideas and bind them by the laws of physics, and then creating a structure so that they aren't just like crazy ideas to take you off course. It can be a challenge, but I think that we can also accomplish some things that are, you know, fundamentally brand new, or that are really kind of break some of the laws of physics. So I would think that working with me is probably a lot of fun and also occasionally frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. And I realize a lot of times was like, for instance, I work with Donna. Donna has been with me for 10 years. I realize I can't always give her all my ideas that I'm thinking about because I'll just overwhelm her. So in my head, I have all these ideas, and once in a while, I'll take it out, I'll test it and everything like that. And if it works well, I'll throw it out, put some money behind it, and all of
Mhm,
that stuff. But
mhm.
I can't tell all my ideas because it just overwhelms the team.
Yeah, and it depends on the person. I think after we've worked together a while, you get to a point where it's okay. We're gonna spitball stuff. We're gonna talk about 10 things. We're gonna maybe study 5 things, and we're gonna do 2 things. So just because we talked about it doesn't mean that it's really what we should
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
really good way to get input because a lot of ideas are bad or premature, or I mean, there's a lot of things that could be in concept good ideas that aren't for us. So.
yeah. Scott, I had to learn that with our Indonesia team over at Resource Global Indonesia. And when I first initially met with them, we would sit down and I said, all right, here's what I'm thinking. Bam, bam, bam. I went to bed. Next day, they got it all done. I said, well, wait, wait. When you and I meet and we're throwing out ideas, does not
Right.
mean that this is something I need you to do. I'm just throwing ideas because I need you to have ownership to be able to share those ideas.
Well, and Tommy, I will tell you this, that I mean, my whole career I was in Oracle consulting. So you've got a customer that's got a problem, and for us to be a heat-seeking missile to understand the problem and solve the problem, I mean, we were just really effective at that, and that was really my mindset. When you move to a product company, the product you're building doesn't solve one person's problem perfectly. You're supposed to find the sweet spot of everyone's concern and everyone's problem and everyone's desire. And then, the product mindset says we need to really pick who our customer is and serve their purpose, not solve like a problem for one particular individual. So it forces you to be much broader in your scope and your approach, how you set up a methodology to bring in a lot of customer feedback so you don't go build something for one guy who loves it, but nobody else can use it.
Yeah. This actually is a good segment. Talk to me a little bit about Switchboard. How did it come across? I mean, how did it come about? How did you develop it?
Well, I'll tell you my perspective, but I will tell you my perspective was preceded by dozens of years. Um, I actually had been involved with a consulting firm, and we had exited in 2019. And we have a couple of gentlemen that are our board members now that have been really felt like they were very missionally minded. They had been called to run businesses in Austin, Texas, in the United States.
Mhm.
And because they were so missionally minded, and they had come up through, one of them had come up through Antioch. So he had a lot of friends that were on the field. He got contacted all the time with challenges that mission teams had met while in the field. And so he was always scrambling around trying to find a guy to introduce or help figure out a way to solve a problem. And the use case was, hey, you know what? Clearly everyone could benefit from the expertise of the body. Maybe somebody's already built a solution to do that. And so we formed a kind of like a dinner, getting together for dinner meeting over the course of 6 months and talked about it and talked about it. And finally, we just felt like we needed to study the problem. So we did some pretty deep research across, and we signed five global mission teams to really understand, is there a need? What would that look like? Are there any peculiarities in terms of the requirements? And we just found that there was a really strong need, although it was a very novel concept. It was very different to think of volunteering as actually co-labor and not short-term mission trips, or
Yeah.
that it's skills based. Instead of saying, here's a volunteer, it's like, hey, here's a guy who can fix your website. You'll want to meet him. It's a very different question if you're on the field side. And on the church side, volunteering always meant, running PowerPoint on Sunday morning or driving the golf cart. So we found that there was a huge need, but when we did that research, we also found that most of our mission partners, our demand side customers, have been wrestling with this for,
Hmm.
as long as 20 years. Oh, we had a guy, isn't so and so's husband an attorney? But how do you capture that information? How do you know that this volunteer that helped you at the soup kitchen also has a degree in Spanish and could be helping with the brochure you're working on? There wasn't like a holistic view. And so people have been trying to solve the problem for a while. And there's a woman who has been around missions for decades that I think you actually know her, who actually had given me a business plan from the early 2000s, where she was like, brought together technologists and said, let's build a system that can do this exact thing. And
Yeah.
then when you looked at it, from her standpoint, this is incredibly innovative, but there weren't smartphones. There certainly wasn't global like internet infrastructure. There wasn't Starlink. There weren't these platforms. So the things that honestly, what we've done really wasn't even feasible before about 10
Mm.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had thought up and brought a team together to try to do something that would have been a monumental effort. So if you kind of look at the timing of how we got to where we are and where we got there, the vast majority of the people that we work with internationally all have internet capabilities and they have smartphones. So that's not everybody. That's a new frontier that will have to be solved. But it's just interesting that even when we started working with Pioneers, who's one of our design partners, they had kicked off their own initiative that they call Propel, led by Bruce Wilson, who's at Asbury, who had just completed his dissertation on virtual volunteering for the Great Commission. But
Oh.
but what's interesting is if you try to do it within a single organization, it really you can't get to critical mass. So, to me, to be able to do skills-based volunteering, you need a lot of volunteers who have different skills, and you need a lot of things for them to do. So you may have an attorney, but it's not an immigration attorney. And I might have an engineer, but he's not a well engineer. So we basically took a lot of the things, the work that pioneers had done for themselves, and we actually merged with them. Bruce actually came over and joined our leadership team for about 6 months to do the transition. But then we took those same principles and we applied them across Pioneers and Christar and Ethnos 360 and a lot of local agencies. So all of a sudden we're getting lots and lots of volunteers, but they're being shared by the organizations that are helping
Yeah.
us identify those people. It's a totally different thing. So uh, for us, I feel like we may have stepped into this at the right exact time in terms of the history of the world, where now I can pick this up and I'm holding up a smartphone and literally talk to any person in the world face to face right now. Is just an amazing concept.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we got started, but we were absolutely not the first.
Yeah. Are you finding that the people who are signing up for Switchboard that want to volunteer are older, retired folks who have lots of time, or younger ones, or a mix of everything?
So it's a mix of everything. At this point, we're not actively recruiting. We're not trying to bring in volunteers in big chunks, and we'll really start focusing on that in January. But the people that are finding us are all across the board. Now, there are a lot of people that are retired that they have attended a perspectives class, so they've gone to
Yeah. Yeah.
Colson Fellows or something like that, where they're like, well, gee, I'm looking to do something. If you start Googling, you'll find that there's virtual volunteering for the Great Commission. So you can find us. And we're also being referred by people that are, running those classes. But we have just as many people that are in their 20s who are really great at marketing. And we have a lot of people that are in education that are great at curriculum or have homeschooled their kids, can help you with homeschooling. Or there's 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 a lot of different places that you can find us. And I would say that some things are better done remotely, virtually than others. And so we tend to kind of channel our efforts into those areas. But in terms of skill sets, I mean, we're called to do really, I mean, everyone is really called to serve and to be engaged. And I think that the people that have that calling are finding us independent of,
Yeah,
whether or not we were
yeah.
directly introduced.
And literally, a lot of times is ministries like Chris Starr or Pioneers would sit there and say, okay, this is a particular skill set or a particular role that we need. And
Yeah.
then you put it on the switchboard and then people sign up for it. And hey, it'll be an 8-month project or a 7-month project or something. Is it literally like that?
But so there's two ways that it works. One is we believe a ministry should be able to log onto the system and ask for a 1 hour phone call with an expert. And so you can ask for a consult, and those usually happen within 2 or 3 days. I mean, you say, I need help with marketing messaging. You click a button, it goes to 4 people that are good at that. And the first one that says, I'll take it, they get introduced directly. So we get out of the middle. So we consider ourselves really a connection platform, not a work management platform. Now, if you said, I'd like somebody to, maybe be an advisor in human resources because I'm trying to figure out how to run this, this training facility and I have all these HR questions, you can post a virtual role. And then we put those in front of people that have human resources skills. And the first one that says, I'd like to meet, then you're also connected for a 1 hour phone call. And after you go through that introduction, if both people feel like they want to serve together, then we associate them in the system. And then
Yeah.
the assumption is they kind of join your team and that they stay forever.
Yeah, yeah. Scott, how have you seen? I know a lot of times you started out of Austin. Have you seen other parts of the world from Asia, Africa engage in what you're doing?
Yeah. So honestly, the reason that I'll be in the Philippines in the spring is because we feel like there's huge, huge supply and demand in the
Yeah,
global south and in those
yeah,
markets. I actually just talked
correct.
to a guy that I think you're friends with in Indonesia 2 nights ago to help start planning that trip. Um, what has happened is that, you know, 2 years ago, actually, when you and I first met, it's like, if you ever met me and we go to church together, or I see you at, I mean, we're signing you up. So it was like just grabbing people saying, hey, don't you care about Jesus and want to serve the Great Commission? As we started signing the demand side customers, like Pioneers, like Christar, like Crew, like a lot of people, they've started to tell their supporters that they can volunteer their skills as well. And so now that Pioneers, who's all over the world, tells their supporters that they could volunteer, they could be directly engaged. Now we've got people, probably about 20% of the people that sign up are are not from the US.
Yeah,
A lot of activity in Asia and a lot in Africa as well. And what's really cool is that now service becomes really different when it's not a Western service model. I mean, we've got a guy that's a guy in Africa that needed help with his website, and a volunteer from Pakistan actually is working with him on. We got
okay.
another guy who was in Pennsylvania working on a website for somebody in Indonesia who asked for help, and a guy in Africa connected with him to help him. And I'm like, is this just not the way that the body is supposed to work? You know, you got a guy in Brussels who's helping a guy in the UK do a English as a second language curriculum for some stuff he's trying to do with some local refugees. And so what I think is going to happen is that when we do our big expansion in 2025, we will actually start to connect people within region, which is going to attract a lot more people to volunteer. And we will have much more of a global delivery model that's not just,
Yeah,
a guy in Austin trying to figure out the time zone of somebody in,
yeah,
Burundi. It's a guy in Rwanda that's working with a guy in Burundi.
yeah. Now, Scott, with every single product, as great as it sounds, you're going to have to work out kinks, your things that you didn't anticipate. What are some of the biggest problems that you didn't learn when you first started that you're still there, you're working? Is it understanding context, time zones, all of that stuff? What are some of the kinks you had to work out?
Oh man, can we extend this by 2 hours? I'll tell you the first thing that we did is that we thought volunteering was white collar stuff, accounting, finance, and computer stuff. And what we found is that finding someone that's on the field who is raising an autistic child and connecting them with a family who has raised an autistic child
Mm,
is
hmm.
huge.
Hmm.
Helping a
Hmm.
young mom with homeschooling or helping someone with a cross cultural issue because you've got a alumni of a mission organization that served somewhere. and so kind of knows the lay of the land. So, I mean, the first thing is that we've kind of redesigned, recast the vision of volunteering by saying it could serve the mission organization, the missionary personally, or the ministry itself. And this wasn't a new thing, but we started working mostly with Western missionaries, and now we're doing a lot more work connecting people with more local missions. So, like the folks I met from Indonesia through uh, through through your organization,
Hmm. Hmm.
we want them to have access to those resources as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, the second thing is that we really underestimated time zones.
Hmm.
That was really hard. People, man, we provided a bunch of tools. We try to help them schedule, but I think that we really struggled with that. And then the other thing that I intimated at the top of the call is that we didn't understand how much baggage there was in terms of people working together in the ministry. Asking if you want to volunteer, everybody says no. Asking if you want someone to help you with your bookkeeping, everyone says yes. We learned to cast things differently so people understood that it was really important
Yeah,
that you understood
yeah,
the value you're bringing, and that's on the demand side. And then the other thing that we also underestimated is if I'm a bookkeeper, well, now I could be a bookkeeper for any of the organizations. I want to be a bookkeeper for one whose ministry is something that I feel like I'm called to. Maybe I'm called to support someone in the Philippines, or I'm really called to support someone that's anti-human trafficking, or called to someone that is church planting. So when we take the intersection of the Kingdom Consultant, is what we call the volunteer, and that Great Commission organization, for the Great Commission organization, they've got to actually be able to help what you're doing. And for the Kingdom Consultant, they might be willing to help, but if you can find someone whose ministry is where their heart is, they're going to stay. They're going to stay
yeah,
forever. They
yeah,
will
yeah,
be
yeah,
part of the
yeah,
team, and 10 years from now, we're going to come back, and that guy's still going to be doing like bookkeeping for that ministry because he's part of their team now.
yeah. All right, let me ask you awkward questions then, Scott. What if you have a volunteer who's just not very good? And a lot of times they think they're very good, but they're, and then you ever have to kick out a volunteer or ask them to
That
leave
never
or,
ever happens. Come on, are you kidding? So I'm going to make your question more complicated for me, and then I'll answer it.
yeah,
So I may have a guy who's like a PhD in something, who's really, 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 really good, but who's so smart he talks over people's heads, which has happened, or who's who's so arrogant that he's not relatable and he doesn't really act like he wants to help. So being a bad volunteer could be that you're so good or so big on yourself, where I could have somebody who's just a little bit good, but who's got a great bedside manner, who'll help you figure it out. So to try to figure out what a great volunteer really looks like is dependent on the person. If you've got a high level like missionary, they might need a high level kingdom consultant who has a lot of expertise and can kind of hang with them. So what we do is that we basically we identify a base need, and that gets presented to both sides. There's clarification that happens. There's chat build up in the app. So I somebody had asked me personally about cybersecurity, and I chatted back. I'm like, well, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at that. Do you still want to meet? They're like, yeah, that would be great. So then we were connected. So the ability to kind of dial in the person is the first
yeah.
thing. The second thing is that everything starts with a 1 hour phone call. So if you're
Okay,
looking for somebody for long term, it's an interview. And at the end of that call, it's a double opt in. So I would love it if Tommy worked with me. I would love to work with Scott. We both say yes. Then we're kind of good to go. Now, the other thing that I will say is that at the end of every interaction, we're going to send a survey to both sides, but it's not publicly available. So if there's issues arising, and it might be that we introduced the wrong person. It might be issues with how the software works, but we get feedback from both sides. And then the other thing is we want to make it really easy that if there's a relationship established around work that, you've got a dashboard, you could say, you know what, Scott's been great, but we're really not going to do that anymore. So I'm going to basically end the relationship. Or, hey, I love working with Tommy, but honestly, I just took a new job. I just can't help anymore. So making it really easy for them to basically kind of step away from that
yeah,
relationship longer term.
yeah.
And then we have concierge as well that you can always click a button, and we have customer service in the Philippines and in the US. So if you need somebody to step in because somebody's just not getting it, we will actually do that as well.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Now, how big of a staff do you currently have now, Scott, as you continue to grow it?
Yeah, so it's a little fuzzy because we have a lot of people that are volunteers and a lot of
Yeah.
people that are part time. We have about six full time
Yeah.
equivalents. Well, actually, seven now, and that's spread across probably 15 people. I mean, there are guys like me that are full time but are volunteers.
Yeah.
And then there are other people that have super like specific skills and they help us, but maybe it's an hour a week because we just really need that one thing that we need. Um, and we're a global team now. We've got two people that are uh, technically BAMs that are in the Middle East. We've got somebody else that's actually deploying with OM, who will be his last day. It was actually 2 Fridays ago. He's actually deploying as a missionary, and then he'll start back up with us starting March timeframe. We've
Yeah.
got two people in the
Yeah.
Philippines, so we've got a pretty we've got good geographic and time zone coverage, and
Yeah.
we've got a pretty good sized team.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see a point, Scott, that you're now working with local churches, church planting, ministry organizations, all of that stuff, because you're constantly working and validating different volunteers, making sure they're a good fit, all of that stuff.
Exactly, and I'll tell you what we think is happening is a big part of what we feel like really convicted in is that we need to partner with the local church. I mean, that's really kind of the home base. And so through a partnership with Pioneers and Christar through Missio Nexus, we're piloting right now a church mobilization kit that you can come to our website and you download it. There's training videos. It's like, here's everything you need for your congregation to directly engage with
Yeah.
400 field
Love
mission
it.
organizations in
Love
the
it.
Great Commission so we can mobilize them. And then the flip side of that is that part of that kit is to turn on to basically bring the missionaries they support onto the platform so that if you want to serve in community together by working alongside the people you support financially, you can actually filter service opportunities by the missionaries that your church sent or that your church supports. So now you've got people working in community across borders who are actually, maybe working together based on a local church model. So it
Mm.
it kind of doubles down on the community of the local church, but it still mobilizes people in a really directed way.
Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. Now, do you find yourself as you continue to grow Switchboard, you're gonna have to provide content, teaching, training, all of that? Have you started doing any of that stuff?
So I will tell you what we think is our go forward model. This is our official position is we're the guys that mobilize like the people who can't go. And we're really good at that. And then you look at, I mean, who's great at content? You've got Perspectives, you got Mission, yes. There's some good stuff with Bible Project. There's a lot of great consulting firms like Matthew Ellison's organization that are really good at teaching people stuff. So to me, I'd rather land in a church and take that 5% of believers who are really sold out for missions and are looking for stuff to do. And I want to go take the easy ones. And then I want to introduce perspectives behind that or mission yes behind that so that they can now
Yeah,
activate the next
yeah,
5%.
love it,
Make them
love it,
easy ones. And
love
then
it.
I'll go get those easy ones. So
Yeah,
I don't think that I could see us becoming part of a bigger thing, but the mission that we have is really targeted. And frankly, I think that we could partner with all those guys who equip people to serve, help them get a heart for service, but don't have stuff for them to do. That's kind
yeah,
of our
yeah,
secret
yeah,
sauce
yeah,
is we can mobilize anybody today.
yeah. Hey, random question. When you
Mhm,
were coming up with Switchboard and all that other stuff, at what point mentioned that you are now working for them full time or you're the
mhm,
executive director.
mhm.
At what point did you realize, oh, this is idea. It's an interesting idea versus, man, now I'm going to put all my effort, all my time. Was there a turning point? Was there a critical moment that you made that decision?
Yeah, so I'll answer the question this way: is that I was actually working as a chief revenue officer for a software company, and I was having these discussions with these two gentlemen, and I was doing a startup thing, and I was walking back to my car after this mixer, and it was like a it was like a Paulian moment. It was like scales fell off my eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do this full time. This is what I need to do. This was summer of 2021. And so I went home and I talked to my wife. I said, I need to do this full time. If this is going to happen, we have to do it. And she was completely supportive. I had a stand up meeting with my CEO the next morning. He was he's not a believer and was a little taken aback, but I told him what my plans were. That was a Thursday. I had a meeting with the board on on Monday the next week where these two board members had asked me to go to lunch. And I sat down and they said, Scott, we've been praying about it and we think you should quit your job and do this full time. I was like, I just quit my job on Thursday. So the answer is that we went all in, like 100%, but we weren't convinced that this was needed or that this was the right time. So we really treated everything as, let's see if mission organizations need it. Let's see if somebody's willing to volunteer. Let's see if that guy will click the button and if that guy will take the call. Let's see if they both like it when we're done. So as we were building out a proof of concept and raising money to kind of test the model, everything was a hypothesis. And if the answer was no, and God's like, you guys are awesome, but this is a relay race and you're just the second leg, we were ready to stop at any point that God told us to stop. And to now answer your question, so having been on this full time for a little bit over 3 years, it was in spring of 2024. It was just now that we basically believe that we have product market fit. It is obvious that when you connect people for the kingdom, that there's high satisfaction on both sides. It's obvious that there is pent up capacity, and it's obvious that there's
Yeah.
profound demand. So it's
Yeah.
like, wow,
Yeah.
it was almost a surprise. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we really do need to do this
Yeah.
thing. So it was it was it was really cool. But yeah, actually, we were ready to stop at any point that God said, "You're not the right team. You need somebody smarter. We need some new feature on a smartphone before this is ready." But I mean, what we really found is that even the people that we connected manually 2 years ago, before we had any software, those guys are all still serving together.
Yeah.
So we need to just do more of that.
Yeah, you're literally working with those who are semi-retired or retired, who have lots of time on their hands because they'll play golf here and there, but they still have an itch that they want to do. Then you're
Right.
dealing with some of these marketplace leaders with kids at home. They still have full-time jobs. They're still traveling. Their church may not know how to utilize them, so they're looking for something to do. But then you're
Exactly.
working with younger people who want to change the world.
Well,
They have the skills.
imagine this. You're at a missions fair at Baylor University, and a sophomore girl walks up and says, "Yeah, I'm really interested in missions. What do you do?" And the pipeline that they are put in is something that it will take years for them to actually become involved in missions. And it's like, well, guess what? You're a journalism major. There's a group in Malaysia right now that needs somebody that can write stories for them based on the things that they're saying. Do you want to meet them? And I mean, it's like, bam, and you
Yeah,
hook them up.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the thing, that there's a little bit of an immediacy that says every believer's in your smartphone, every missionary is available to you. Who do you want to meet? Where do you fit? So it creates kind of a new demand that really wasn't relevant
yeah,
before, that now becomes almost, people are kind of like, well, of course I would just call somebody that could help. There's got to be somebody out there. And so what we've told our mission partners, our Great Commission organizations, is you should expect more. Stop thinking scarcity. Stop thinking about what you could get by on. Start thinking about what's possible. And even with, in some ways, I think that the local missions, the local guys get it more because they're more
yeah,
businessy
yeah,
than the traditional missionaries. But I think that the future ministry, the
yeah,
field, like the Great Commission guy or gal, is not necessarily the theologist. They're more the project manager, or
yeah, 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 yeah.
they're more of a GM
Yeah,
of a mission than the guy who necessarily hands out brochures and preaches and updates the
yeah, yeah,
website
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything else.
And don't look at the marketplace leaders as a guy who would just fund everything that you're doing. It'll come. You need it. But they have a certain itch. They have a certain skill. They have a certain passion.
Yeah,
Tap into those passion and help them figure out, he or her, to really figure out how God's designed them.
exactly, exactly. And I've done some research around. It's really more of a supply chain, the friction of moving of resources around. That once you develop connections, where there are real connections, then whatever is going to happen will happen naturally. But right now, most of the resources are still channeled through traditional missions, where much of the growth and much of the success has really been with local missions.
Yeah, yeah. And for those who are listening, Scott, I've learned this as well too. Even some of our guest speakers or volunteers and all of those things, they're my active donors. But the
Mhm.
one thing they will always say to me is, Tommy, you do a very good job of honoring our skills and finding different opportunities that fit with our passions, our skill set.
Right. Well, I think if I'm on the donor side, I'm who am I going to give to? Well, this couple came to, church during Mission Sunday, and I met them. They seemed nice. Or, this guy I went to school with. I mean, I was meeting with a couple that I met at Lausanne, that's in Bangladesh, and they're have some. I mean, the cost to do things in Bangladesh, it's like a dollar goes a long way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't know anybody in any of the wealthier countries. And the discussion we had is that if you ask me for money, I might give you money. But if I become part of your ministry because I'm working alongside you and I see that you have needs, then all of a sudden I'm part of your team. It's a very different thing. If I'm participating in your ministry, I know what you're accomplishing. I know what you're struggling with. I know what your circumstances are. And it's a very different thing. I mean, there's some big donor advised funds that actually I'll shout out for Signatory that their motto is connecting donors to doers. And I'm like, I think that's a great thing because I think the transparency that comes when I actually know the person that's in the field, as opposed to just the organization or getting the newsletter from the organization, it's a much deeper relationship. It's much more
Yeah,
intimate.
yeah, yeah. Very good. Scott, where can people find out more about Switchboard, about yourself?
I would say go to globalswitchboard.io, globalswitchboard.io. And if you are a mission organization or ministry, sign up saying that you want to meet, like you want to meet more volunteers to help you with your organization. If you are like a everyday believer is what I call, us, is if you're an everyday believer, it says, I want to volunteer my gifts for the Great Commission, something like that. So there's basically two buttons. Pick who you are. It takes 3 minutes to fill out a profile.
Yeah,
And then you can actually immediately go through and start looking at ministry opportunities that you could connect with the missionary
yeah,
immediately by just clicking a button.
yeah. And I also encourage all of the ministries, churches, Bible schools, everything like that. If you're looking for some of those volunteers, uh, sign up. I mean, a lot of times globalswitchboard.io is a great platform for you to use. So thank you so much, Scott, for doing
Well, we
this.
need supply and we need demand. So if we get a
Yeah.
bunch of volunteers, we got to have stuff for them to do. If we get a bunch of mission organizations sign up, we need a bunch of people to connect with them. And remember, we're not trying to like broker a wedding. We're trying to introduce you to people that want to participate in your ministry.
Yeah. Hey, last thing, one final question.
Sure.
Switchboard, who came up with the idea? What was your concept when you created that?
The name itself or the concept?
The name itself.
So we were Tent Makers Network and confused the fire out of everybody. Well, when do you? How does that work? And we really got down to the fact that our goal was to connect believers with ministries everywhere. And actually, a former crew guy in China who's in Austin now, David Daniel, had come up with the name, and he said switchboard, and then he sent me the picture that's got like the little dots connecting parts of the world. I'm like, immediately, I was like, that's it, 100%. So yeah.
When I first heard the name Switchboard, my first visual is this lady on TV back in the days in the early 80s sitting at the White House, sitting there plugging different things and connecting everyone together. That was my first visual of Switchboard.
Trust me, I know the exact image that you're talking about. Yes. And for guys my age, they actually know what a switchboard is. Maybe not old enough to use one, but at least know what that is. For people that are 30, it has a connotation, but it doesn't really mean anything, which is really what we wanted.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hey, thanks for just being there. And we're going to have to talk more as it continues to evolve, how things are going, what you're working on, because I love it. I love talking with you. I love everything about it.
Well, I appreciate all you do. You are an inspiration. So thank you for everything. And we should catch up sometime.
Yep. Talk
All right.
soon.
Thank you, sir. Bye now.
Bye.
It was like a Paulian moment. It was like scales fell off my eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do this full time. This is what I need to do. This was summer of 2021.